In this chilling murder mystery, we delve into the disturbing case of a 73-year-old grandmother who allegedly killed her own grandson. The tragic incident was horrifyingly captured in a 911 call, where the grandson pleaded desperately for help as he faced a barrage of gunshots from his own grandmother. The woman later claimed self-defense, but we'll investigate whether there's more to this story. The victim, Jonathan Hoffman, was just 17 years old, residing in the affluent suburb of West Bloomfield near Detroit, Michigan. Known for his sense of humor and kindness, Jonathan was finishing his final year at Farmington Central High School and had dreams of attending Eastern Michigan University. He had a passion for technology and could even build computers from scratch. Jonathan's iconic white t-shirts and gray sweatpants were a reflection of his desire to be known for who he was, not his appearance. However, 2011 was a challenging year for the Hoffman family. Jonathan's parents, Michael and Jennifer, were undergoing a divorce and planned to move the family to Arizona. Unfortunately, their younger daughter, Jessie, was diagnosed with a non-malignant brain tumor, requiring extensive medical attention. This upheaval left Jonathan feeling lonely and longing for his friends back home. In this difficult situation, Jonathan's grandma, Sandra Lane, came to the rescue. She offered to take him in until he completed his senior year, ensuring he could stay with friends and familiar surroundings. Sandra, a former school teacher, lived in a condo in West Bloomfield with her husband, Fred Lane. She was known as a loving and caring grandmother to her 5 children from a previous marriage, including Jennifer, Jonathan's mother. Jonathan's parents trusted Sandra to care for their son, believing he would be safe and happy under her watchful eye. Little did they know the tragic events that would follow. On a chilling evening in May 2012, around 5:30 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police received a distressing 911 call from a man named Jonathan. He was living with Sandra, his grandmother, for several months. The anguish in Jonathan's voice was evident as he pleaded with the dispatcher for help. What happened next was truly horrifying. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were met by Sandra, who had her hands up and she screamed, "I murdered my grandson!" She led them into the house where they encountered a gruesome sight with blood and gore everywhere. Jonathan lay on the floor unresponsive, having sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Beside him, a Glock 9mm semi-automatic handgun and 9 spent ammunition cartridges were found. Jonathan was rushed to the hospital, but tragically he was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. An autopsy later revealed that he had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to his chest, abdomen, and left arm, though some sources claimed there were 5 or 6 bullet wounds. The grandmother, Sandra Lane, is currently on trial for murder, and the horrifying moments after the shooting were captured in a frantic 911 call made by Jonathan himself. Incredibly, he managed to call the police while he was being shot. Adding to the shock, Jonathan identified his own grandmother as the shooter. The court heard the emotional 911 call, which led to Sandra's tearful reaction. The family and the entire community were shaken by the violent and tragic death of 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. They struggled to comprehend the reason behind his grandmother's actions. It was revealed that Jonathan had been experimenting with narcotics, specifically synthetic marijuana known as Spice or K2, which had caused friction between him and Sandra. In fact, there had been a previous incident where Sandra called the police on Jonathan for his aggressive behavior. However, she had also tried to protect him from arrest, claiming she would handle the situation herself. Sandra later confided in her husband about her fear of her grandson and his friends, which was further evident in another incident that occurred in March 2012. Jonathan, who had allegedly consumed mushrooms for the first time. This led him to panic, and he made a rather unusual decision. He called the police on himself. When an officer arrived, Jonathan apparently hugged him tightly, showing signs of distress. Consequently, he was taken to the hospital for hallucinogen use and later faced charges of possessing narcotics. Although he received a suspended sentence of 93 days and 2 months of probation, the situation took a dark turn when he was eventually killed. During the investigation, police discovered synthetic marijuana and other substances in Jonathan's room. Tests on his body also came back positive for marijuana. Sandra, Jonathan's grandmother, took the stand in court and claimed that she armed herself with a gun and confronted him in his upstairs bedroom loft. She hoped that this act would compel him to pay attention to her and engage in a conversation. However, things escalated quickly, leading to a heated argument between Sandra and Jonathan. The situation turned violent, with Jonathan allegedly attacking his grandmother. Fearing for her safety, Sandra fled from him and sought refuge in the basement. After a few minutes, she returned to check on Jonathan. Sadly, their confrontation resumed, and Sandra fired the gun once again, this time with tragic consequences. During the trial, an interesting twist emerged when Sandra's husband, Fred Lane, testified for the prosecution. He claimed to have been completely unaware of his wife's possession of a gun. He expressed shock and surprise at this revelation. Fred stated that although Jonathan had faced difficulties, Sandra was determined not to send him back to his parents, even after he had requested it. An intriguing revelation occurred about an hour before the tragic incident. Sandra had asked Fred to take the dog for a walk after they returned from Jonathan's narcotics test. This raises questions about her intentions and whether the murder had been premeditated. The trial lasted approximately 2 weeks, and during this time, the jury listened to the distressing 911 call made by Jonathan, wherein his grandmother fired bullets at him without showing any signs of remorse. The prosecution argued that despite Sandra claiming to be afraid of her grandson, she made no effort to escape from the house or call for medical help during the incident. Sandra claimed that she acted in self-defense when she pulled the trigger, shooting her teenage grandson Jonathan 6 times. However, during her arrest, the nurse who examined her found no injuries and was surprised to hear Sandra speaking lovingly about Jonathan. Sandra's defense tried to portray her as a frightened elderly woman, taking care of a troubled teen who was involved in narcotics and bringing strangers into her home. They argued that Sandra felt she had no choice but to protect herself. Nonetheless, the jury wasn't convinced, and she was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder. Her husband wept upon hearing the verdict, but it was her daughter who had a different stance. Jonathan's mother considered Sandra a monster and urged the judge to impose the maximum sentence. During the sentencing, Judge Denise Langford Morris raised critical questions that had troubled the jury. Why didn't Sandra call the police instead of resorting to such extreme measures? Why did she keep shooting Jonathan repeatedly if she truly felt violated and afraid? In the end, Sandra Lane was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison for killing her grandson, with an additional 2 years for the use of a gun. Jonathan's mother expressed her approval of the decision, stating that she was relieved her mother would be behind bars for the rest of her life. As we wrap up this case, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Do you believe Sandra's story of self-defense, or do you think there's more to the story? Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more intriguing crime-solving content.